Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Benjamin, and in this video, we're going to be adding some to the inventory tutorial that I made last week. So, as you can see, by the end of this video, we'll have an inventory like this that has stacking items, and you can still swap items around, place them in different slots. If you drop them outside, they jump back here, and also if you drop them outside of the view, they jump back here as well. So we're going to be addressing some of the issues that were in the previous video. And this inventory is its own scene. It's a control scene. So you should be able to drag and basically drop this inventory into whatever game you're working on. It just needs to be inside of some sort of a control node, preferably a container of some sort, and then it should work great with the game that you're currently making. So let's get started. We're going to first start by removing the inventory container script that is attached here. So, well, actually, very first, let's grab the font and we'll import that in. So we'll come into reference, inventory reference here, copy this font. We'll come back into inventory tutorial. I'll paste the font in here. And we can right click, do new resource, do font, and we'll do a dynamic font. And we'll call it Pixel RPG. This is a font that I made. We'll set the font data to pixelrpg.tff. We'll set the settings, set the size to 6 because that's the height of our font. You should just be able to save. And we should have our font. So now we'll come on our inventory container here, and we will grab this script here, come down here, and just do clear. There we go. And we can come into here, we can go over inventory container.gd, and we can do Control W to remove it from this list here. And then we can remove the script from here as well. There we go. Now we've removed that. So now we can drop items outside of the inventory and they're going to vanish. So we need to solve that problem. So the way that I decided to solve this problem was by storing a reference to the drop data inside of our inventory.gd. So if we come into here, inventory.gd, we can create a new variable up here at the top. We'll call it drag data. We'll set it equal to null. So our drag data is just going to be a reference to the data that we're dragging around. And so if we accidentally drop outside the view or outside of our inventory, we can still have access to that drag data. So if we come into our inventory slot display, we're going to need to store this data when we get the drag data. So inside of here, right after setting the drag preview, we can do inventory.dragData equals data. Save that. Now we need to change how drop works. Inside of drop here, after getting my item, we'll want to check to make sure our item is actually an item. So we'll say if my item is item and my item, this is actually, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself there. That's actually for the item stacking. So what we need to do actually is just here at the end of this, when we drop the data, we just need to say inventory.dragData equals null. So we'll set our drag data equal to null if we drop the data. So how do we capture the drop if it doesn't drop inside of one of our inventory slots? Well, we can use our inventory display right here, and we can give it a new unhandled input function. So the unhandled input is an input event that hasn't actually been handled, right? Nothing has happened with it. And the reason we have to use an unhandled input event is because if we do actually drop the data in a slot, then we don't want this function to run. So if we drop the data into an inventory slot, then it will count that as handling the input and it won't run this function here. But if we don't, if we drop it somewhere else where that input is unhandled, then we can say if event.isAction released, and we're going to do UI left mouse. I think we set up that, didn't we? If we come into our project settings and inside of our input map, maybe I didn't set up the left mouse and right mouse stuff. So we'll add a new action here. We got to set this up, UI left mouse. And we'll just give it mouse button, left mouse button. Here we go. So now we should be able to check for this event.isAction released UI left mouse. If inventory.drag data is a dictionary, basically if it exists, inventory.set item, inventory.drag data.item index. So first we pass in the index that we want to set. And that's that's where the inventory was before, right? We're storing the index that it was in when we picked it up. We save that in our data and it's useful now. And then we want to do inventory.drag data.item. And that's the item that we want to set. We want to set it back to where it was before. So now when we run the game, we should be able to drop this outside the view and it drops back to where it was before, even if we drop it clear out here. But if we drop it on another slot, it will properly switch or move to that new slot. Okay, so we fixed that bug. And that was a pretty big deal. But now let's add item stacking, because this is a common requested feature and it makes a lot of sense to cover it. I was actually planning it for the original video, but had to cut it because of time issues. So come into our items, and instead of item, we're going to add a new variable here, but not an export variable. We'll just say var amount equals 1. We'll set amount to 1 by default. Now we'll come into, we'll come into our inventory slot display. And inside of here, we need to attach a number to this so that we can see it. So we'll add a label node. Make sure you've selected the item texture rect. Add a label. And this label, I'll set it to 100 for now. And we'll want to give it our custom font that we set up. And we'll grab our pixel font. There we go. And then I'm just going to set our alignment to center. And we will, let's see. We click on this item texture rect, we can then see kind of where that is positioned. And then kind of try and position this at the bottom right corner. That's what I'm thinking. Somewhere like right here. Looks pretty good. Now, when we display an item, we're going to need to update the label here. We'll call this item amount label. And then we'll get access to that on ready var item amount label. And then when we display an item, we can set that value here. So we'll say item amount label dot text equals string item dot amount. We need to convert this amount to a string, but then we can just display it there. And we can also do item amount label dot text equals empty, no text here. That's what we'll set it to if the item is null. When we run the game, we should get our numbers here. We can't stack them though, it still just swaps, but it does properly display the amount that that item is. So let's set up stacking. We'll come back into, or we'll scroll back down to our drop data. Remember when I was getting a little ahead of myself? Well, now we actually want to do that. So after getting my item, we want to make sure that it is an item. If my item is item, that just makes sure that it's not null. And my item.name equals data.item.name. So now we're comparing the item that is in this current slot with the item that is in the drop data. We're comparing their names to see if they're the same item. There might be a better way to compare them. I forgot the other equals sign here for our comparison operator. So I'm just comparing their name, but like I said, there might be a better way to compare them. I didn't really come up with one, so I just used this. This is good enough. You can change it later if you come up with a better way to compare them. If they're the same though, our path is clear here. My item.amount plus equals data item.amount. We don't need to swap them around or replace them or anything. We just set the item amount. We just add their amounts together basically so that the item in this slot now adds whatever the drop item amount was. But we need to signal out we need the inventory to signal out saying that that item has changed so that the UI can update the amount label. We'll say inventory.emit signal items changed, and then we'll do my item index because we want to do the item that this item, my item, the item inside the current inventory slot. Else, so if it's not, else, so if it's not the same item, and the logic here seems a little bit off to me now that I'm looking at it, but it does seem to work, so let's test this. Else, we want to do what we were doing before, which was swapping the items and setting the item for this current slot. Now we should be able to do that. So now we'll try and stack them. Well, that didn't work, did it? What's going on there? Why isn't the stacking working? Well, I'll tell you why the stacking isn't working. So let's come into our inventory display. And inside of the ready function, let's print inventory.items. Print inventory.items. And we'll run the game. And let's look at these. Okay, so these are the resources. This is our list of items. Now you'll notice something here, right? We have 1, 2, 3 potions here. It's in the first slot, second slot, and the last slot. If we look at those potions, you'll see that they have the exact same ID. Resource 1203, 1203, and 1203. Now this is a side effect of working with resources. When you use a resource, Godot tries to share that resource. And that's a good thing because a lot of the time you do want your resources to be shared. That takes up less memory. It takes up less, it just takes up mainly less memory, so you can share those resources. The problem that arises is when you actually want those resources to be unique and you don't want them to be shared like they are right here. And that's a pretty common problem that comes up, but it's an easy solution. And so the solution is that you can duplicate a resource and it will give you basically a new instance of that resource. So we're going to write a function inside of inside of our inventory here that will loop through all of the items in the inventory and make them each unique, so they're not shared. They're not sharing the same resource. So I'll just call this make items unique. Feels like not quite the best name, but it's good enough. And then we'll say var unique items. We'll make an empty array. Then we'll loop through our previous items for item in items. And then we'll append a duplicate version of, well, first we need to make sure it is an item. So if item is item, because it could be null, right? We have to account for the null case. Let me get a little bit more space here. If it is an item, unique items dot append item dot duplicate. There we go. That gives us a copy of our item. Else, if it's null, unique items dot append null, because it's an empty inventory slot. And at the very end here, we can say items equals unique items. So when we call this function, it will loop through every single item inside of our inventory and make it unique so that it's its own unique resource. It's not a shared resource between the other items. And whenever you add an item to the inventory, you might want to make that item resource unique as well. So you might consider having this part right here do item.duplicate. That's kind of up to you how you're going to handle that. You might actually duplicate the item before setting it in the inventory. I don't know how you're going to handle that. That's a little bit of like a personal choice, I feel like. I'm just going to leave it this way because I think this is fine for now. But when we are setting an item like that, we might want to make it unique. So here we go. That's what this does. Now we can call this inside of our inventory display ready function here. Inventory dot make items unique. Now when we run the game and we print our items, they should all be unique. 12, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58. Now Godot uses automatic garbage collection for resources. So once a resource no longer has a reference to it, it will actually remove that resource instance, and then when you need it again, it will instance it again. So that's something to keep in mind as well, because that can be a little bit confusing. For example, if you load your inventory in one scene and then you close out of the scene, there's no longer a resource to that inventory, and then you load the inventory back in again later, it's going to be a new instance of the inventory. It won't be the original that you had. So for things like the inventory that you'll want to be persistent across your entire game, you might want to load them into a singleton or something so there's always a reference to them, or just load them into a node that's attached to the root node. That way it never actually gets removed. That's something that I've considered doing as well. Then it wouldn't be a singleton, but it would still always have a reference to it and never go away. Anyways, that's a little bit deep there for this tutorial, but now we should be able to properly stack these. You can see there is 2 there. You can stack it, and now there is 3. So our signal doesn't seem to be working when we signal out here. Items changed, inventory.emit signal, items changed, my item index. What's going wrong here? Inside of our inventory slot display, the slot gets, when does this get connected? Display item. We update the text. That looks correct to me. Item.amount for when we call display item. Inventory display here, we're connecting to on items changed, and we update the inventory slot, which calls update the inventory slot. And if we're in here, Wait, where is update inventory slot? Inventory slot display. Display item. Yeah, that's correct. So it should be properly updating. So something's a little fishy here to me. It is working. It is emitting that I knew I was going to make this mistake at some point. We all knew it was coming. So this takes an array. So we need this to be an array with my item index in it, because it could be more than one item that gets updated. In this case, it's only one that gets changed, but it could be more than one. And in fact, our swap, it is more than one. That's why we have it set up as an array, but I forgot to do that. So now we should see this properly stacking immediately. And we can see that does work. And we might be good to, I wonder if we can get this to where the numbers don't overlap each other. That's something I didn't see before. We might set the, I don't remember if you can set a custom like Z index on these labels here on this control node. But that doesn't really matter. That's just some little thing that we might want to fix here. It's not like a big deal. You might not want it to go over other items anyways. You might want to move the amount so that it's in a different position so it doesn't go over them. And there we go. If we go outside the view, they jump back here. So I think this is better. This is a better version of what we had in the previous tutorial, and I hope you learned something from it. Once again, I've messed around a lot with resources. This is basically how I have my inventory set up in my games, and there may be some better ways to do this. So if you have some ideas for better ways, feel free to let me know. And I do have plans for a action RPG series, well, not an action RPG series, hack and slash series in Godot. And I want to make it similar to my Game Maker Studio 2 Grave series, but it won't be using those resources. It won't be exactly the same as that. I have some ideas for how I'm going to change it, I think, but it's not completely planned out yet. So that's something I'm working on right now, but you can look forward to that. And also, if you enjoy my content, I really appreciate when people support me through my course. Today is actually basically the last day for my fall sell for my Godot course, and I've gotten quite a few people who have signed up for that, way more than I initially thought would. Seems like there were a lot of people who were they really wanted the course, but it was just slightly outside their price range, so this sell helped them to get it. So if that's something you're interested in, be sure to check out the link at the end of this video and the link in the description. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and I will talk to you all later.